The words hung in the air of my own kitchen, more chilling than the November draft seeping through the old window panes. You eat but do nothing. My son-in-law Tyler said it, with a casual, dismissive wave of his hand, as if commenting on the weather, not slicing open the heart of the woman who had raised his wife. And Nancy, my daughter, my only child, stood beside him and said nothing. She just stirred her ridiculously expensive coffee, her silence a ringing endorsement of his cruelty. In that single, brutal moment, I wasn't their mother anymore. I wasn't Margaret, the woman who had poured her life into this Cincinnati house, who had made it a home with the scent of her Sunday meatloaf and the warmth of her love. I was just a line item on their budget, a mouth to feed, a useless piece of old furniture that took up space. They thought my quietness was weakness, my grief a fog of senility. They didn't know that silence can also be the sound of a plan taking shape. So that evening, as the sun began to set, I took a pen and a piece of paper, and I left a note for them on the stove, right next to the empty pot where dinner should have been, and then, before they even knew I was gone, I disappeared. It had all started with a gesture of love, as these tragedies so often do. When my husband Frank passed, the silence in our big house on the west side of town was a crushing weight. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the grandfather clock, was a reminder of my profound loneliness. Nancy and Tyler were living in a cramped downtown apartment, perpetually complaining about the rent, their student loans, the general injustice of their starter life. My heart ached for them, and for myself, so I offered them a lifeline that I thought would save us all. Move in with me, I'd said one Sunday, over coffee. There's so much space here, you can save money, get on your feet, and I wouldn't be so alone. Nancy's eyes had lit up, a flicker of something I mistook for daughterly affection, but now recognize as pure opportunism. Oh, Mom, are you she'd cooed. We couldn't possibly impose. Tyler, with his smooth, practiced charm, had sealed the deal. Margaret, you're a saint. We'll take such good care of you. You've done so much for us. Now it's our turn to look after you. I swallowed their promises like a starving woman. I believed them because I needed to. I needed the noise, the life, the feeling of being a mother again. I helped them move their boxes in, clearing out Frank's old office to make space for their thing. I didn't realize I was not just making room for their furniture. I was beginning the slow, painful process of my own erasure. I was a willing participant in the dismantling of my own life, naively believing I was building a new one for us all. The colonization of my home began subtly, with 1,000 small cuts to my identity, each one disguised as an improvement. The first thing to go was Frank's recliner, the worn leather chair, where he had read the paper every morning for 30 years. It's just so bulky and dated, Mom, Nancy had said, her voice laced with a gentle pity that was more insulting than outright disdain. We found a much more modern piece that will really open up the living room. The modern piece was a cold, angular sofa that was impossible to get comfortable on. I didn't say anything. I watched the delivery men haul away Frank's chair, a piece of my heart going with it. Next it was the walls, the family photos that lined the hallway, generations of memories, from my wedding day to Tyler's first steps, were taken down one by one. We're going for a more minimalist aesthetic, Tyler explained, as he replaced a cherished photo of Frank and me with a generic, mass-produced print of a fern. My history was being curated out of existence, deemed too cluttered for their new, streamlined life. My kitchen, once my undisputed domain, became a battleground. The recipes I had perfected over a lifetime, the dishes Nancy had begged for as a child, were now met with polite disgust. My meatloaf was too heavy, my fried chicken was too greasy. They embarked on a series of trendy, expensive diets, filling my refrigerator with strange green juices and foods I couldn't pronounce. The comforting aromas of my home were replaced by the smell of steamed kale and simmering resentment. I tried to push back, to hold my ground on the small thing. I like my curtains, Nancy, I'd say softly. They were a gift from your grandmother. I know, Mom, and they're lovely, she would reply, her tone making it clear they were anything but but they just don't go with the new color palette. We have to think about the overall look of the house. The house. Not my house. The house. The language was shifting, and with it, the balance of power. Every suggestion I made was met with a patient, weary sigh. Every preference I expressed was treated as a stubborn refusal to get with the time. They were experts at making me feel like the difficult one, the one who was stuck in the past, the one who was preventing our new family from gelling. I was being gaslit in my own living room, made to feel unreasonable for wanting to see my own life reflected in the home I had spent my life creating. The injustice of it was a constant, low-grade fever. I would retreat to my bedroom, the last bastion of my former life, and listen to the sounds of them rearranging my world, without my consent. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself this was the compromise required to have family around. But the loneliness I had so desperately tried to escape was creeping back in. And this new version was far more insidious. It was the loneliness of being invisible, of being a ghost in the vibrant, modern home my house was becoming. The assault on my emotional space was quickly followed by a strategic takeover of my financial independence. It was a masterclass in manipulation, performed with the loving concern of devoted children. They sat me down at the new glass dining table, the one that always had smudges on it, and presented a stack of my own bills with grave expressions. "Mom, we were just going through these, and we're worried," Tyler began, his voice a perfect symphony of sincerity and concern. "You have so much to keep track of. The mortgage, the utilities, your insurance, it's a lot for one person to handle." Nancy placed her hand on my arm, her touch cool and proprietary. "We just want to make life easier for you," she said. "What if we consolidated everything? We could open a joint account, and we can manage all the household payments from there. Your pension can be direct deposited, and you'll never have to worry about missing a due date again." My heart sank. Frank had set me up so carefully, ensuring I would be independent and secure for the rest of my days. My finances were my last vestige of autonomy, the one part of my life they hadn't yet touched. "I'm perfectly capable of paying my own bills," I said, a defensive edge to my voice that I instantly regretted. "Oh, we know you are, Margaret," Tyler said smoothly, his tone placating. "This isn't about your ability, it's about us taking on some of the burden. It's what families do. We want to take care of you." They used my love for them, my desire for a harmonious family, as a lever to pry open my life. To refuse their help would be to accuse them of something nefarious. To admit that I didn't trust them, it would shatter the fragile peace. And so, worn down and wanting to believe in the best version of my daughter, I agreed. The next day at the bank, Tyler did all the talking. He charmed the teller with a story about helping his aging mother with her estate plan. I signed the forms, my hand unsteady, adding both their names to my checking and savings accounts. And just like that, they had the keys to the kingdom. For the first month, they were meticulous, the bills were paid on time, but then the bank statements started to tell a different story. There were charges from expensive downtown restaurants, online shopping sprees for clothes in Nancy's size, a weekend getaway to a spa in Chicago that I certainly wasn't invited on. The withdrawals were disguised as household expenses or family needs. But I wasn't a fool. I knew my money was funding their increasingly lavish lifestyle. I tried to confront them, my voice shaking as I held up a statement showing a withdrawal of several $1,000s for home improvements. It had paid for the giant wall-mounted television they now watched every night. "Tyler, what is this?" I asked. "We didn't discuss this." "It's an investment in the property, Mom," he said, not even looking away from the screen. "It increases the value for all of us." The audacity of it left me speechless. My savings, the money Frank and I had scrimped and saved, was being used to improve a house they were living in for free. And I was being told it was for my benefit. I was no longer a person, I was a resource. I was the silent involuntary financier of a life from which I was being systematically excluded. I was paying for the very decor that was erasing me, funding the very lifestyle that was marginalizing me. The injustice of it all settled deep in my bones, a cold, heavy stone of resentment that I was forced to carry in silence. Their conquest of my home was nearly complete. With my decor replaced and my bank accounts under their control, they turned their final efforts toward my spirit, isolating me, until the house became a veritable prison. They were systematic, cutting me off from the outside world with the chilling precision of military strategy. My friends, the women who had been my support system for decades, were the first to be targeted. My weekly card game with Monica and the other ladies from church was a sacred ritual. It was a few hours of laughter, gossip, and camaraderie that nourished my soul. One week, Nancy informed me that she and Tyler were hosting a networking event for his job on the same night. "You'll have to cancel your game, Mom," she said, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "We need the space, and it's going to be a late night." I suggested they use a different room or reschedule, but my protests were waved away. "It's just this once," she'd said. But it wasn't just once. The following week, there was another excuse, and the week after that, another. I was forced to make a series of humiliating phone calls to my friends, offering flimsy apologies that I knew they didn't believe. They began to call less often, likely assuming I was either unwell or simply didn't want to see them anymore. My dearest friend, Monica, was the most persistent. She knew something was wrong. She started calling at odd hours, trying to catch me when Nancy and Tyler were out. But they were clever. They started screening my calls. More than once I heard Nancy answer my phone, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, Monica, I'm so sorry Margaret is napping right now. She's been so tired lately, or worse, her memory's been a bit off today. The doctor says it's best to keep things calm." They were building a narrative of my decline, painting a picture of a frail, confused old woman who couldn't be trusted. It was a masterful, cruel stroke. It not only kept my friends at bay but also discredited me in advance. If I ever managed to get a message out, who would believe the confused old woman over her caring, concerned children? The isolation was total. My world, which had once been filled with community and connection, had shrunk to the four walls of my bedroom. I was completely dependent on them for everything, for rides to the doctor, for groceries from Walmart, for any interaction with the outside world. And they used that dependence to control me completely. They treated me like a child, or worse, an inconvenient pet. They would speak about me as if I wasn't in the room, discussing my needs and my moods with a clinical detachment that made my skin crawl. "We need to make sure she takes her pills," Nancy would say to Tyler, loud enough for me to hear. "She was very agitated yesterday." I was not agitated. I was heartbroken. I was enraged, but my emotions were pathologized, twisted into symptoms of my supposed decline. The loneliness was a physical presence now, a heavy cloak that I couldn't shrug off. It was a far more painful loneliness than the one I had felt after Frank's death, because this was an isolation enforced by the very people who were supposed to love me. I was a prisoner in a beautifully decorated jail, a warden and a guard who wore the faces of my own daughter and her husband. My spirit was eroding, worn down by the constant daily friction of their disrespect. I was fading, and I knew that was exactly what they wanted. The pretense of being a happy blended family had long since evaporated, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth of our arrangement. I was no longer a mother they were caring for. I was an obstacle and an unpaid servant. My existence in the house was tolerated only as long as I remained useful and invisible. My days fell into a bleak, joyless routine. I would wake before them and tiptoe into the kitchen to find the sink overflowing with the dirty dishes from their previous night's dinner. They would leave them there, a silent, entitled command, and I, out of a lifetime of habit, and a desperate, pathetic need to avoid conflict, would wash. I would tidy the living room they had cluttered, fold the laundry they had left in the dryer, and dust the furniture they had bought with my money. I was the ghost who cleaned up after the living, my efforts unnoticed and unacknowledged. If I did something for myself, it was met with open disdain. The smell of the simple grits I'd cook for my own breakfast would cause Nancy to wrinkle her nose and open a window as if I had contaminated her pristine air. My presence was an imposition. They would walk past me in the hallway without a word of greeting. They would have loud, animated conversations on the phone, laughing and making plans, while I sat in the same room completely ignored. I was a piece of furniture that breathed, a silent witness to the vibrant life they were living at my expense. The verbal slights became more frequent, more pointed. They were no longer veiled insults. They were direct shots. Tyler took a particular cruel pleasure in making me feel stupid. "It's an app, Margaret," he'd say with an exaggerated sigh if I asked a question about his phone. "You probably wouldn't understand." Nancy, on the other hand, specialized in a kind of dismissive pity. "Oh, Mom, don't worry your pretty little head about it," she'd say if I asked about a piece of mail that had come for me before tossing it in the trash. I overheard their conversations more and more, not because I was snooping but because they no longer bothered to lower their voices. They saw me as so insignificant that my presence didn't even register. "I can't wait until we can sell this place," I heard Nancy say to Tyler one night. "We could get a condo downtown, something with a view, something that's actually ours." Tyler's reply chilled me to the bone. "We just have to be patient. The lawyer said if we can prove she's incompetent we can get conservatorship. It'll be much cleaner that way." Incompetent, conservatorship. They were actively plotting to have me declared legally unfit to manage my own affairs, to strip me of my last remaining rights. They weren't just waiting for me to die, they were actively working to accelerate my social and legal death. The full scope of their betrayal was finally laid bare. This wasn't about them needing a place to stay. This was a long calculated They had moved in with the intention of taking everything: my home, my money, my freedom, and finally my legal personhood. The love I had for my daughter, already a bruised and battered thing, shriveled into a cold hard knot of pure survival. They had misjudged me. They saw an old, grieving widow. They didn't see the woman who had survived poverty, who had nursed a dying husband, who had raised a child on her own strength. They didn't know that beneath the soft, quiet exterior was a spine of steel, and it was beginning to stiffen. The breaking point came not with a bang but with a quiet, devastatingly cruel remark. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and dreary, matching the mood that had settled permanently over my home. I had spent the morning doing their laundry and cleaning their bathroom. I was tired, my bones aching, and I had just sat down in the living room on the uncomfortable sofa they had chosen to rest for a moment. I had a cup of tea in my hand. It was the only pleasure I had left. Tyler walked into the room, talking on his phone, laughing about some deal he had closed at work. He glanced at me, sitting there, and his face soured. He ended his call and turned to me, his expression one of pure unadulterated contempt. "Must be nice," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I looked at him, confused. "What must be nice?" "This," he said, gesturing around the room at me, at my cup of tea. "Sitting around all day. You eat but you do nothing. You don't contribute a thing. Nancy and I are out there working our tails off to build a life, and you just sit here consuming." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. "You eat but do nothing." It was the ultimate negation of my entire life. Every meal I had ever cooked, every floor I had ever scrubbed, every bill I had ever paid, every tear I had ever wiped away, all of it, my entire life's work as a wife, a mother, a homemaker, was reduced to nothing. I was just a mouth, a useless, consuming mouth. In that moment something inside me broke, but it was a clean break. The part of me that had held on to hope, the part that still made excuses for them, the part that loved my daughter unconditionally, it all shattered and fell away, leaving behind a core of cold, clear, unshakable resolve. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't defend myself. I simply looked at him, at the stranger standing in my living room, and I saw him for exactly what he was: a greedy, ungrateful parasite. And I knew with absolute certainty what I had to do. I waited until he and Nancy left for their evening yoga class. The house was finally quiet. I walked into the kitchen, a room that had once been the heart of my home, and had become the site of so many small humiliations. I took a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone, and a black felt-tip pen. I walked over to the stove, the symbol of my decades of thankless service. I placed the paper on the cool stovetop, and wrote 5 simple words: "Dinner is on you tonight." Then beneath it I added, "And every night after this." I went to my bedroom and retrieved the small fireproof box from its hiding place in the back of my closet. Inside were my essential documents: my birth certificate, my social security card, the deed to the house, and a folder of bank statements I had secretly printed out. I packed one small bag, a change of clothes, my medications, a photo of Frank. Then I walked out the front door, leaving the key on the kitchen counter. I didn't look back. I disappeared into the twilight, not as a victim running away, but as a queen abdicating a corrupt throne, leaving the jesters to reign over an empty, hollow kingdom. The air outside had never smelled so sweet. I walked 3 blocks in the cool evening air to a small diner, my heart pounding a steady, resolute rhythm against my ribs. I sat in a booth by the window, ordered a cup of black coffee, and pulled out my phone. I had only one person to call. "Monica," I said when she answered. "I've left." There was no surprise in her voice, only a deep, weary sadness. "Where are you, Margaret? I'll come get you." "I'm at the old City Line diner," I said. "And Monica, I'm ready to fight back." "I know you are," she replied. "I've been waiting for this call. Stay put."
Waiting for Monica felt like the first moment of peace I'd had in over a year. I was no longer trapped, no longer waiting for the next insult, the next act of erasure. I was in motion, I was in control. When she arrived, she didn't offer pity or platitudes. She slid into the booth opposite me, ordered a coffee for herself, and looked me square in the eye. "Tell me everything," she said, and so I did. The whole sordid story came pouring out: the redecorating, the financial takeover, the isolation, and the final brutal insult. I showed her the bank statements I had brought with me. I told her about their plot to have me declared incompetent. Monica listened, her expression growing colder and harder with every word. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "They are monsters, Margaret. But they are stupid monsters. They left you with the one thing you need to destroy them, the deed." She nodded, a grim smile playing on her lips. "The deed. Your name is the only one on it. The house is yours. Legally, they are nothing more than tenants with no rights. We are not just going to get them out, Margaret. We are going to make them pay for every single thing they did to you." The next morning, we were in the office of a lawyer Monica knew, a sharp, formidable woman named Miss Davenport. I told my story again, this time with a strange sense of detachment, as if I were describing events that had happened to someone else. Ms. Davenport reviewed my documents, her eyes scanning the deed and the bank statements with practiced efficiency. "This is an open and shut case of financial elder abuse and illegal tenancy," she announced when I was done. "We have multiple avenues of recourse. We will file for an immediate eviction. We will sue them for the funds they misappropriated, and we will file a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services." The plan was swift and aggressive, and it filled me with a sense of righteous power. For the first time in a very long time, I was not the one on the defense, I was the one on the attack. The first step was the most satisfying. Ms. Davenport drafted a formal eviction notice, citing my sole ownership of the property and the termination of their tenancy at will. A process server was dispatched to the house that very afternoon. I can only imagine the shock on their faces when they were served with legal papers in the home they had so confidently declared was theirs now. Their reign was officially over. They just didn't know how complete their downfall would be. The phone calls started almost immediately after the eviction notice was served. First it was Tyler, his voice a mixture of disbelief and rage. "What is this, Mom? What kind of game are you playing?" "It's not a game, Tyler," I said, my voice calm and steady, just as Ms. Davenport had coached me. "It's a legal notice. You have 30 days to vacate my property." "Your property?" he scoffed. "We've been paying the bills. We've been making improvements." "You've been paying the bills with my money," I corrected him gently, "and you have been living there rent-free. The law is quite clear on this. I suggest you speak to a lawyer." He hung up on me. An hour later, Nancy called crying. It was a performance of weaponized tears, designed to manipulate and guilt me. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "We're your family. You're going to make us homeless." "You were the one who was prepared to have me put in a home, Nancy," I reminded her. "You were the one who sat by while your husband told me I did nothing but eat. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." Her tears quickly dried up, replaced by a familiar venomous anger. "You will regret this," she hissed. "You'll die alone, you bitter old woman." "I would rather die alone in peace than live with you in misery," I replied, and then I hung up and blocked both their numbers. From that point on, all communication went through our lawyers. They hired one, of course, some bargain basement attorney, who sent Ms. Davenport a blustering letter full of empty threats. Ms. Davenport replied with a concise 2-sentence letter that essentially outlined their complete lack of any legal standing. We never heard from that lawyer again. The 30 days passed in a tense, quiet standoff. I stayed with Monica, rebuilding my strength, while they scrambled to find a new place to live, a task made significantly harder by the fact that I had also frozen the joint bank account, cutting off their access to my money completely. They were forced to face the reality of their own financial situation, and it was not pretty. The day of the eviction was a rainy, miserable Tuesday. I didn't go to the house. I didn't need to. Monica's neighbor gave her a full report. A small, shabby moving truck pulled up in the morning. Nancy and Tyler loaded their belongings themselves, their faces grim and thunderous. There was a loud, protracted argument on the front lawn. Nancy apparently was blaming Tyler for everything. He, in turn, was blaming me. Their perfect curated life had imploded in the most public and humiliating way possible. Their kingdom had fallen, and they had no one to blame but themselves. The poetic justice was almost biblical. They were forced to move into a tiny rundown apartment on the other side of town, a place far worse than the one they had so desperately wanted to escape. Their new fancy car was repossessed. Their credit was ruined. They had tried to steal my future, and in doing so, they had completely demolished their own. With the house finally empty, the process of selling it began. It was a bittersweet experience, walking through those rooms again. The ghosts of my past were everywhere. The ghost of my life, with Frank, the ghost of my hope for a future with my daughter, and the ghost of the woman I had been before they broke my heart. But with the help of a good real estate agent, we cleared out the last of their cold modern furniture and staged the house to highlight its warmth and character. It sold in less a week for a price that made my head spin. Holding the check from the sale felt like holding a tangible piece of my reclaimed freedom. It wasn't just money, it was security, independence, and the power to write my own next chapter. And I knew exactly what that chapter would be. I didn't want another big house. The silence in those empty rooms had taught me that my happiness didn't depend on the size of my home. I bought a small sunny condominium in a quiet complex, with a community garden and a library. It was perfect. It was mine. The first thing I did was hang my family photos back on the wall. Not the curated minimalist collection Nancy would have approved of, but a joyful, chaotic jumble of memories. Frank and me on our wedding day, Tyler as a gap-toothed little boy, my own parents young and full of hope. I was reclaiming my history piece by piece. I also started a new tradition. Every evening, before dinner, I would sit down and write in a journal. Life settled into a new peaceful rhythm. I had my friends back. Monica and I had our Thursday lunches again, and the laughter was sweeter than ever. I made new friends at the condo complex, other women my age who understood the quiet joys of a life lived on one's own terms. We played cards, we tended the community garden, we shared stories.
I was no longer isolated. I was part of a community. One afternoon, about a year after I had left, I received a letter with no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Nancy. My hands trembled as I opened it, not with fear, but with a weary resignation. It was a long, rambling letter, filled not with apology, but with a litany of her own hardships. Tyler had left her. She was struggling to pay her rent. Her life was a mess. She blamed me for all of it. "You destroyed our family," she wrote. "All because you couldn't handle a little criticism." The letter ended with a desperate, audacious plea. "I need your help. I have nowhere else to turn." I read the letter twice, then walked over to the small shredder I had bought myself as a housewarming gift. I fed the letter into it, and watched as her words of blame and entitlement were sliced into meaningless, powerless strips of paper. I did not owe her my help. I did not owe her my forgiveness. I did not owe her anything. The debt had been paid in full by my own pain and resilience. My legacy was not my daughter's inheritance. It was the fund I had created, the women it would help, the story of strength it would tell. It was the quiet dignity of a life rebuilt from the ashes. I sit on my balcony now, watching the sun set, a cup of tea in my hand. The quiet no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like peace. I think about the note I left on the stove that day. It was more than just a goodbye. It was a declaration of independence. It was the moment I stopped being a victim and started being the author of my own story. They told me I ate but did nothing, but they were wrong. I had nourished a family. I had sustained a home. And in the end, I had fed my own soul with the one thing they could never take away from me: my own unbreakable strength. And that is a feast that will last me for the rest of my day.